Welcome to Nature Knows, Conversations with Wild Warriors and Changemakers. I'm your host, Jen Vitanzo, and this podcast is all about nature, both the wild kind outside our front doors and the human kind written within our DNA. Each episode showcases an individual who has dedicated their efforts to create a better today to ensure we have an actual tomorrow, and they are using their unique creative fingerprints to do it. These are the wild warriors and changemakers constructing the bridges necessary to connect us all, human to human, species to species, worlds to worlds. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nature Knows. This week's guest is Dr. Melissa Howes-Whitecross, who's the Program Director for the Landscape Conservation Program with BirdLife South Africa. She's also the host and producer of Conservation Conversations, a weekly webinar about the importance of conservation. She's on a mission to increase the number of women in the birding field and to also increase awareness about the importance of conservation overall. So I'm very excited to introduce her to you today, and I'm very excited to also talk to you about two of my favorite birds, which she also knows quite a bit about, the secretary bird and the southern ground hornbill. So I hope you enjoy it. Dr. Melissa Howes-Whitecross, yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Make sure I'm getting it. I was saying, somebody asked me before, and I said I think it's Howes or How, and I was like, I should probably get this right before I introduce her. And I feel like I keep blaming it on sort of a quarantine brain. I swear it's like my brain has slowed down in certain ways in the last few months. Like certain things are just not processing the way they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was like, I'll get this. So welcome. It's amazing. I first of all, I so miss the accent. It's been 2 years since living in South Africa, and
Sure.
it's just I still say certain things like bin and boot and bonnet and
Awesome.
yeah, I've still carried over a few of my things, and every once in a while I'm like, yeah, but, and people would just look at me like no idea what that was, and then I have to stop myself and remind myself that
Oh yeah, there's a chunk here.
yeah. So.
Awesome.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to be part of this. So you're BirdLife South Africa. You aren't, but you're with.
Yeah. I'm with them.
How long have you been with the organization? Because it's BirdLife International, right? And BirdLife South Africa is a subsidiary of that specifically for Okay.
Yeah, so BirdLife International is our sort of umbrella organization. BirdLife South Africa itself started in 1996 in its current form, but we actually date way back into the early 1900s. We were the South African Ornithologists Union, and we had various forms through the 1900s, but we're quite an old group, but in our current conservation form, we've been around since 1996, and I joined BirdLife in 2017.
And you deal more with raptors, if I'm not mistaken. Do you handle?
I was, yeah. So
okay.
At the beginning of this year, I took over our landscape conservation program. So I now oversee all of our land-based conservation work on both species and ecosystems.
Right.
But prior to that, I was managing all of our raptor and large terrestrial birds projects. So secretary birds, southern banded snake eagle, blackstalk, all the sexy big species that people love.
Secretary bird. I have a special place in my heart for secretary birds in a bizarre way because of Disney. Because when I was growing, and I have no idea why, because the movie predates me, but for whatever reason, when I was a little girl, there was a movie called Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and I guess it was because of this. Do you know it? So you know the secretary bird.
I know Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
With his little monocle and his little waistcoat and everything. Oh my gosh, I love that bird. So that is how I learned about a secretary bird in the first place. And then I remember when I moved there. Actually, when I went on vacation there, I went on vacation before I moved there, to sort of check it out and be like, all right, do I really want to do this? Or is this just like my being crazy? And that was one of the first birds that we saw out in the bush. And I was just like, oh! It was so exciting. And it was a nesting pair at the top of a tree in
That's
the tell.
Amazing.
And I was like, oh my God, those are my birds. And the people around me are like, how do you know what that is? And I was like, Disney!
Yes. We've got lots to thank from Disney. I think they've opened up a lot of African wildlife to people.
I know, right? Except for the whole hyena thing. I'm like, we'll forgive you on that. We'll work on changing the perception.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So I love that you're doing stuff. It's not just, so I know way back when I was first learning about all the conservation stuff in general across the board globally, there was so much just about species and very little about the connection between habitat conservation as well as and things like in integrating local communities and everything, because it was just so sort of silo based thinking. And I love seeing now how much it has evolved into this more broad scope of, well, you can't save a species if it's got no home, and you can't save a species if it's in, like, there's so many different dynamics that are at play. And I think it's like so many industries, we have a habit of compartmentalizing and not realizing the interconnectivity of all of them. So, with regards to the species conservation, I know I was in the crew for a bit and we did some stuff with trying to restore some of the farmland back to the original sort of Karoo ecosystems and biomes. Where are you working right now? Like, do you have a specific area that you've been working? Don't mind my coffee, by the way.
Oh,
It's 9 a.m. for me.
no,
Me and
go
speaking
for
of Disney, but
Yes. Yeah, so I'm based at our head office in Johannesburg, but as the Landscape Conservation Program, we have a network of sites that we work in across South Africa. So we've got a Western Cape Estuaries project, which is run by Dr. Giselle Merson, who's doing amazing work across the Cape, looking at trying to preserve our estuaries and obviously all the shorebirds that go with them. And she's also moving more into sort of catchment conservation. So it's not just about the estuary itself, it's what's going on in the catchment further upstream and how do we work with landowners to keep that river system as a whole healthy and to keep our estuaries secure. So that's one of our focal landscapes. Then we've got a huge presence in the grasslands. So South Africa's grasslands are probably one of the most threatened ecosystems in the country. And we do a lot of work working with private landowners, a lot of cattle farmers. Obviously, healthy grasslands are absolutely key for those industries. And we work with private landowners to secure their properties for biodiversity stewardship, which is a government legislated process that allows us to provide these lands as a conservation space, but still provide economic value to the farmers that are grazing them. So there's a really nice kind of management dynamic to keep our grasslands safe and intact on that front. And obviously linked to that, we've got a lot of wetland research that goes on. So within our grassland landscape, there's really important wetlands that are home to species like the white-winged flufftail. So we do a lot of work around these high altitude wetland grassland systems, trying to keep them healthy and managed correctly. And we do a lot of community upliftment and education along those themes as well, with things like the Flufftail Festival, which I can go into a bit more detail about a bit later. And we've also got a huge footprint in the northern Zululand regions, so the east coast of South Africa and KwaZulu-Natal, home to many, many special East African species. The southern banded snake eagle is one of our apex predators in those coastal forests. And we've actually just declared the very first vulture safe zone in KwaZulu-Natal. So that's an initiative we're carrying out across vast parts of South Africa. So Tswalu is actually the first declared vulture safe zone in South Africa. We're working in the Waterberg, Dronfield Nature Reserve, and a range of other sites, trying to make these big landscapes safe for our vultures and other large terrestrial birds. So we're all over South Africa, and I've got a great team of conservationists working under me who are doing phenomenal work to save our birds and the ecosystems.
that's so great. So when I first moved there, I worked with Wildlife Act, and they were doing quite a
Fantastic.
bit up in northern
Yeah,
Zululand
they're one of our partners in there.
with banding with vultures, and I think that was really my first true experience. I mean, we have turkey vultures in the States, but other than
Yes.
that, I hadn't really had any experience with them. I'd see them sort of flying around, and that was pretty much it. I saw one on the ground the other day for the first time, and I was like, that's a big bird. You see them up there, and your sense of perception and
Yeah.
perspective is just gone. So when you see them on the ground and you realize like how big a southern hornbill or ground hornbill or any of the vultures, and some of them, like, you see a lapid-faced vulture and like, this bird is huge. They're huge.
Absolutely. They are monstrous. Those leopard
Uh,
face, I definitely wouldn't want to get on the opposite end of that schnoz. They
right?
would tear you to pieces.
But they're so cool. I mean, I was chatting with somebody. I did a thing with kids. I was doing a book reading with the kid children's book that I'd written, and we were talking about sort of nature's redheaded stepchildren, which I feel like vultures always fall into. People are like, oh, they're
Yes.
awful. I'm like, oh no, they're amazing birds. And the social hierarchies within the each species of the bird and how they've adapted beaks and the feathers or lack of feathers and yeah, it was just so fascinating. And I have to admit, I mean, okay, So, two things with birds that I think are just hilarious. One is the names. So, the fact that there's a flufftail festival, which is probably the best
Yes.
named festival ever because it's just adorable. And when I first learned studying birds in ornithology in college, was in Costa Rica, and I was assigned what was then known as the scarlet-rumped tanager, and
Oh,
I was like,
cool.
other great name for a bird. Um,
Yeah.
some of them I'm just like, what were they thinking? But
Yeah.
and I sort of joke and say this was definitely a male-dominated industry for a long time.
Oh yeah, tits, boobies, and
Yeah,
shags,
right.
right?
um, but the other thing too is just I mean, there's birds all around us at all times. You know, whether you're in a city, whether wherever you are, there are always birds, and it's one of those things I feel like we have a habit of just sort of taking for granted and not even noticing. You know, it's kind of like white noise to a degree. Like insects as well, they're there all the time, and they play such vital roles in our ecosystems and in our life and the things that they do and provide the services they provide, just by being alive. And like vultures, especially in terms of being the undertakers and cleaning up
Yeah, the
the
cleanup crew.
carcasses, yeah, and like making sure that we are not exposed to millions of horrible germs and viruses and bacteria like anthrax and botulism, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. We have around our house here in Massachusetts, I have a whole bunch of little bird feeders too. So I just sit there and love to watch, and it's so interesting to watch the dynamics of them. Like we have blue jay. We hadn't had blue jays, and blue jays are like the jerks of the bird. I always call them
Yes.
the jerks. They're such bull. They're really cool, but
Yeah,
they're
bullies.
such bullies. But just to watch the sort of the dynamic of sort of the house sparrows, and then we have house finches, and there's a family of cardinals that live next door, and they just had little babies, and like the cute little sort of awkward looking juveniles that are just starting to get their sort of peaky
Yeah.
feathers and that look like the awkward teenager. But I just love the dynamic and just how incredible they for these little tiny things. For I mean, okay, vultures aside, like we said, or giant eagles and things like that. For what are considered small animals on the sort of the grand scheme of things, how incredibly adapted they are to their environments. And like I started reading this book, and I haven't finished it, mostly because it's one of those books that when you start reading it, you don't want to miss anything, so you just read it
Yeah.
really slowly and hope that you're going to memorize the whole book somehow. And it's called The Genius of Birds. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes, I
Have
have heard of it. It's an
Oh,
amazing
you
book.
have to read it.
Yeah.
So I just sat there flabbergasted. I was like, oh my God, birds get speech impediments. Or some birds have speech. Like, this is
Yeah.
amazing. And how certain songbirds have to learn their songs and they have to practice. And, so many things we've
Yeah.
taken for granted. Like, they just know how to sing. It's like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
So I got infatuated with birds because I had to study them. Basically, I went to Costa Rica because I was like, I want to go to Costa Rica. And they're like, you have to study birds. And I'm like, okay, I'll study birds to go to Costa Rica. Like at the time, I was like, all right. Hadn't really thought it through until I started sitting with them every day and was like, these are such cool animals. How did
Yeah.
you get involved with birds?
So I guess it's always a hard question for me to answer that because I was almost intrinsically attracted to birds from the day I came out of the womb. I apparently, as a baby, in order to calm me down if I was throwing a hissy fit, my grandparents would just literally walk me outside to their bird feeder and I'd calm down instantly.
Oh my
I've
God.
I've been attracted to birds since as long as I can remember. My parents' party trick was to make me do bird calls before I could talk. So I think it's just I've been really, really blessed to have always had birds in my life. I wasn't a hardcore bird watcher, I'd say, until I got to university. I didn't really kind of classify myself as a birder when I was younger. There weren't a lot of role models for me to hang out with as birders in South Africa at the time. And sort of at school, there wasn't really an environmental program or anything like that that I could dial into. And I was really hardcore into sport. Actually played national field hockey for a couple of years. So that kind of took me away from my birding hobby. But birds were always present and I'd always noticed them. But luckily, when I got to varsity, I met a whole lot of really bird mad students and lecturers, and that just ignited my kind of nuclear fire for becoming this really, really passionate bird watcher and ultimately, luckily, ornithologist. Um, yeah, and I decided not to actually do ornithology at varsity. I pursued vegetation ecology because I always knew I'd have the passion for birds and kind of unofficially study them anyway. But I figured in order to help them better, I needed to understand the ecology behind them and understanding that ecosystem's approach to saving them. So by studying vegetation ecology and still having that passion for birds, I've been able to really bring those two passions together in my work at BirdLife, and it's set me up a lot stronger to be able to try and help save these birds and understand their environmental needs in the background. So yeah, that was sort of my birding journey, and obviously meeting my partner Caroline back in the day, who was also an absolutely avid bird watcher. The two of us have spent every waking hour together birding, so that helps too, having
That's
someone to go out
fantastic.
and bird as well. Yeah.
It is. There is something definitely like it's a very peaceful thing to go out on your own. Sorry, unfortunately my shelf is down, so I have to keep leaning.
No
I should
worries.
find a different place to put this. I need a bigger table. I like going out on your own is one thing, and it's nice and it's peaceful and it's a great recentering and kind of breathe. But it is so.
Yeah.
I think it's so much fun to have someone else to do this with because you can. One, it's two sets of eyes, which helps too.
Yes.
But
And ears.
yeah, but it's also like how cool just to be able to share these times and finding, especially these birds that are so rare, or when you find a bird that is not supposed to be there, and happens to have just shown up for whatever reason, either I don't know, God, of course, somehow, or which though I'm finding is not all that common with birds. That apparently, from what I was reading in the book, and I guess they're finding that they don't actually get off course as much as we used to think that they do. That somehow the book was talking about things like potentially with iron, and they're trying to figure out exactly how it is that they are able to hone in on wherever they're going. Like even if you kidnap a bird, cover its eye, like drive it 2,000 miles away, and then let it go, it still manages to find its way home and orient pretty much immediately, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible. Like
It
I
is.
get lost in my backyard. It's so I always found that sort of fascinating that these birds have these incredible little again adaptations that make them so it's just fascinating.
Yeah, and so able to navigate this wide world that we need crazy GPS systems and all sorts of things to guide us. They can just
Right?
find their way. It's
They just go.
incredible. Yeah.
But sitting with somebody that you can have these experiences with and talk through them, and watching bird behavior if you've never seen particular behavior, it's just awesome to be like, did you see that? Am I seeing, like, is that really happening? Is that,
Yeah.
it's just but I love
Yeah.
that you studied like you basically studied the ecology side of things instead of studying the actual birds themselves. Not because it's the bad thing to study the birds, but like you said, it's like you
Yeah.
realize that there are so many components that factor into. And one of the things that I've always tried to impress when I worked with kids and even with adults is sort of you don't have to do one thing. There's
Yeah.
so many things connect to so many other things. So if you have, like, I have friends who are scientists, but they're also artists, and they're like, well, art and science are so different. I'm like, no, they're not. They're not at all. There are so many similarities with regards to
Yes.
observation and having a natural curiosity for understanding the world and trying to find a way to communicate it to the world and understand it better.
Yeah.
But it's just, using your brain to connect these dots, and all of these things are connected in different ways. And, that you don't have to do this to get to this. The
Yes.
last person I spoke to she studied ocean engineering.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
she's currently studying ocean engineering. And she does horseback riding, and she does, obviously, scuba is sort of part and parcel if you're working in the ocean. But she also has a family of music. She comes from a family of musicians. And people are like, how did you become an engineer? And she's like, well, music is math. And also, again, comes back to that whole, if you have communication skills, you can find a way to get into so many things, because
So true.
our world is about, for us as humans, we're a social species that relies on our communication. And I just love talking to people that have not been like, well, you have to do this. That's it. That's the only way to do it. It's like, no, there are a million and one ways to find your way to wherever you're going. Or if you end up in a
Absolutely.
slightly different place, you just and pivot and move to the next. You just, yeah. It's.
Yeah.
I mean, I
No,
didn't
I
technically
totally
study.
agree with you.
My area of study was technically English. And I ended
Wow.
up in Costa Rica doing ornithology because I was like, well, it gets me to Costa Rica first and foremost. And then I was a musician for years a touring musician before I moved to South Africa to work in the field in conservation. And
That's
like, what are you
amazing.
singing to the animals? And I was like, sometimes. That's not
Yeah.
why I was there. They did not care. In fact, they usually didn't want me to sing. um,
No, that's amazing. Yeah, I love hearing how people end up where they got to, and invariably there's often quite a complex and convoluted path that they've taken to get to any one point. And yeah, it's always enjoyable hearing everyone's different journeys.
well, it always boiled down to being able to communicate. It really did. It was, I kept getting hired because I could talk to people about stuff. And I loved the science. I loved animal behavior. And just love understanding why things do the things that they do and how that affects, whatever's around them, whether it's, the other animal, their species and the other species they interact with, and then the ecosystems that they're within. And then on a broader range, like going from the microcosm to the macrocosm. I've always been fascinated with that, which is also why I loved art. It
Yeah,
was, understanding how to see the world. And like, I got into photography because of it, because I didn't see it necessarily as subject matter as much as colors and textures and light and shadow and how they all interplay, kind of like the grand scope of the world. It's all interplay.
yeah,
And I was like, it's not all that, but at the end of the day, it's not all that different. There's certain things you have to study specifically, because it's not like I could go out in the field and would know how to tag a vulture just
yeah,
showing up, and that would definitely not end well. but but the understanding, and or the willingness and interest and curiosity. And I think that's, as human beings, that's what marks us, I think, so much as human beings, is that natural curiosity. It's the primate thing, which is, I think, part of
yeah.
the reason why people don't like a lot of monkeys, because they're so much like us.
Oh yes.
And they, yeah. I'm guessing you may have run into some stuff with the baboons, particularly in the Cape.
Oh my goodness, primates, wowzers. I was recently camping in Whitsun Nature Reserve in the Northern Cape, and came home to a rather trashed campsite where the vervets had been using our tent as a slip and slide and wiping their bums all over our canvas.
Oh,
So yeah,
oh.
great fun dealing with monkeys. But yeah, we live and learn, and they're part of the system, so we can't hate them for that.
But I think,
Small price to pay to get to wild spaces.
but I think you also got to appreciate. I mean, you have to appreciate that too. It's like that. Just, I think I have definitely, and it's funny. South Africa, being in South Africa was amazing, like for so many reasons. But one of the main ones was that because there's so much outdoor life, there's so much connected to the outdoor world and to like the whole ecosystem of life in general. And
Yeah.
I found coming back to the US was such a change, because I mean, it was gone for 8 years, which in and of itself is
Wow.
a while. And coming back to the States, and I was like, everybody's inside all the time. And like, I understand New England has some pretty awful weather, but this is just across the board. I mean, I was in Southern California for a long time before I was in New England. And while you do have a lot of that in sort of the California side of the world, a lot of the world, like the US, is in the house. People don't know their neighbors. People don't get out. They don't, like, I loved Brying. I loved that every day we were basically outside with people, in the bush, whether or in Cape Town
Yeah.
or in Joburg, whatever city, like bush, whatever we were at, you were outside. And
Yeah.
even though, Cape Town summers, you get those wonderful thunderstorms that come through for like an hour every day.
Yes.
But then it's gorgeous again, and then you wipe everything down and you go back outside. And
Yep.
it was really strange to come back and have such a world where people spent most of their time inside. They were on screens. They were, not that we're not doing that right now, but this is also a different world. But it was really like odd to me to see how disconnected we were to nature on the whole. Like, not everybody and not every place here, but on the, from what I've seen on the whole, in the US, we are very disconnected from the natural world. We literally just keep putting up walls to keep it all out. And every opportunity to connect with it, we're like, no, 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 no. And that's been really hard. It's just that it's been an adjustment of trying to explain to people, like, no, no, we need that. We work with each other. Like, we can't survive without that. Like, that's
Yeah.
keeping us alive. Just FYI, not YouTube. YouTube's great. It's
Yeah.
fun. TikTok is fun, but and I'm sure like psychologically it's just, makes you laugh or whatever, but which is valuable as well, but the disconnect, one, from each other, and two, from the whole world around us, I think has had a profound influence negatively on
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah, and it's so important that we push people to get outside again. And I think one of the things we experienced here in South Africa, we had a very hard lockdown from the end of March. And we had 5 weeks where we were literally not allowed to leave our houses. You could send one person from your house to go to the shops and get you the sort of bare essentials, and then they were allowed to come back. And I was very grateful at the end of last year. We moved to a house with a very small garden, but a garden nonetheless. And we'd been in an apartment. And I think if I'd been locked up in that apartment, not allowed to go outside, I literally would have gone nuts. So just having a green space, be it a little postage stamp, I had my feeder and I'd watch my birds every single day. But having that access to a slightly more natural space to go and just kind of vent in and recharge was so key for me getting through that whole lockdown period. And I know something that's really been coming out a lot with kind of post lockdown life is just how valuable nature is to people. And when you take them away from those green spaces and you block them from being allowed to kind of go out into the parks and go out into the nature reserves, people really missed it. And the kind of uptick in hiking and outdoor activities in South Africa is even more than it was pre-corona. So it's wonderful to see people using those green spaces and really valuing them, and hopefully it bodes well for kind of preserving them going forward because of that.
Right. This is a newfound appreciation and understanding of the value, like you said. It is. I mean, I've got to think that that's a fundamental reason why more people get sicker in general, is it's not being part. I mean, it's forget the actual value in terms of the intrinsic value of fresh air, fresh water, working functioning ecosystems mean we have everything we need to survive. There's another book that I read that actually, if you haven't read it, I recommend. It's called, Tony Juniper wrote it, called What Has Nature Ever Done for Us? And what he basically does is he takes apart, it sounds so negative on like the title of it. I was like, at first when I picked it up, I was like, really? But then I read the back of it and I was like, I get this. So he basically takes all the natural processes that nature provides for free and says, if we're going to have to make this into economics, let's put an economic price tag on what the actual value of this is. All the oyster beds that are natural filtration systems that
Yeah.
we have that we've taken out and now we're putting back in because we realized the value of. And it's really fascinating, like that side of it. But then there's also the aesthetic and peace side of it, like this intrinsic sense of peace that comes from being out there. And you can probably hear all the blue
I can
jays
hear
around my
your
house right
blueberries.
now. They're tormenting the other birds. I'm like, I'm gonna go out there with a water gun, and I know that sounds horrible, but I'm like, y'all need to keep your space on my backyard because I have all these other birds and they're trying to eat, and you're being brats. They're such cool birds, but yes, they can be such brats. But yeah, so just that incredible sense of connection and feeling like you're part of something bigger.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so key that we do value nature. And unfortunately, we live in a society where it is all about economics. And I know there's a lot of people trying to put numbers to all these ecological systems and really quantify how important they are in a financial language that people understand, coming back to your point about communication. But absolutely, if we don't value our biological assets and our natural ecosystems, we can't eat money at the end of the day. You need those natural systems to be intact in order for us to survive as a species. So
Right.
yeah, I think people are waking up to the fact that we're not taking care of the planet and there isn't a planet to eat. So we need to get on with saving this one that we've got.
Right. What is the saying, when the last fish has died, when the last bird has something, there's a whole, when the last
Oh
tree
yeah.
has started, like we'll learn that we cannot eat money. Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually the sign
Precisely.
off on one of my email accounts, but it's in Spanish, so I can't remember what the actual English translation is, which is kind of ridiculous. But yeah. So getting into your area, your field. I just have a quick
Yeah.
question with regards to, because I did find that also covered in mosquito bites, by the way. So
Shame.
scratching my ankle.
It's almost mosquito season here.
Oh yeah, we've had the craziest. I'm going to totally segue to something totally different, but just kind of along the lines of the value of all of this. So I was driving. I had to visit my family. My father actually turned 80, which is so strange. I'm like, how
Wow.
is my father 80? So I was down there visiting there in New Jersey, and I went down to visit for like 2 weeks, which is the first place I've been since quarantine, and
Sure.
have been so careful to not be out and not like interact with a whole lot of people. And then there's my family who are like, "Well, no, everything's fine." I'm like, "No, guys, it's not." But okay, so but I remember driving back and thinking when I was doing touring around the U.S. and I would drive great distances, or not even great distances, but I've been driving constantly to gigs. And I remember the front windscreen of my car used to be just covered with bugs. It was like a crime scene, so many on your headlights, on your
Yeah.
just, and I drove 5 hours and my windscreen was almost perfectly clear. And this is summer here, still, technically.
I
It
know.
was right. It was, and people I
Yeah.
think a lot of times were like, "Oh, this is amazing. There aren't that many bugs." I'm like, "No, that's not a good thing."
That's
Like we,
bad. Yeah.
yeah, and like there's plenty of mosquitoes, and of course there's plenty of mosquitoes because there are fewer frogs that are eating the larvae. There are fewer other things that would be eating them, so
Yeah.
they're proliferating. But everything else is just kind of going. Whoo. But anyway, total digression there. But with regards to the field, working in the field, so what I found as a bit of a challenge, and I didn't find it as much in South Africa in certain areas. I found it more so in other areas. But being a female coming into it, sort of some specific challenges of I think people just sort of assumed I couldn't pick up a tire or whatever, which is what it is. But have you found that there are specific challenges that you've run into, just not being a male in the industry?
Yes and no. So I think I'm a bit of an anomaly in that I'm quite a hardcore chick. I've been, I'm going to say that in South African slang, but I'm pretty tough and I've made myself an extremely capable individual. So I've lived out in the bush alone. I've had to know how to kind of fix car engines and change tires and do all of that tough stuff. And absolutely, I mean, when guys are around, they'll always try and step in and do the gentlemanly thing and take over. And I sort of have to say, no, it's okay. Like, I've got this. It'll be fine. You can go and make us sandwiches or something, which they obviously don't like. And I think definitely from a relationship point of view, I have very, very good guy friends, but all of them are extremely comfortable with I'm going to say their femininity in a way. They're not trying to prove that they're these really, really hardcore guys. The gents in South Africa who need to prove the fact that they're these manly men, definitely I'm not their cup of tea. And obviously, there's a lot of those particular individuals in the conservation sector, which is why I don't work on lions or cheetahs or I tend to work on the slightly less big and furry charismatic species because yeah, it's definitely less challenging to move around in that space. And even in the raptor world, I mean, you've got the raptor cowboys running around who kind of like, oh yeah, that girl who works on secretary birds, whatever. They're not even really raptors, are they? But I guess
Don't tell them
I'm
that.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, the genetics are there now. We know they are. But I think it's been a long and slow process of just wearing people down and getting them to know who I am and that I'm not some threatening person or whatever. I'm a very capable individual who can get stuff done and works really really hard and is passionate. And slowly over time, as people have gotten to know me and gotten over the fact that I'm this very hardcore person, they definitely have warmed to me. And yeah, I think there are definitely barriers to overcome. But if you're tenacious and determined and just keep putting yourself out there despite what people say, you can overcome them. And I've been really, really lucky and fortunate in the strokes of luck in my career that I've ended up where I have the team at BirdLife are amazing. I have an amazing female boss who heads up our entire conservation division, Dr. Hanleen Smith Robinson, who gave me my first break at BirdLife. And she's definitely a formidable woman force in the conservation sector doing great things. And it's amazing to see where she's taking BirdLife. We've undergone the huge restructuring process after she took over the conservation division. And it's all pointing into the right direction of taking our organization forward. And it's wonderful to be in a world where it's so easy to connect with people. And I think of groups like World Girl Birders and all these amazing platforms where we can connect with other female role models. And I think growing up, there weren't always that many role models, be they male or female, to connect with. And the older I've gotten, the more connected I've become through social media and various other birding activities. And it's wonderful to be able to find similar people out there who are in conservation doing their thing, are strong ladies, and yeah, it's you can overcome all those barriers, and the world is becoming a much more accepting place, luckily.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. Because I know that
Yeah,
one of the coolest things being down there was at one point working at a field guide training camp and seeing the number of women coming in, women LGBTQ, just in general, just your non cisgendered male who come
yeah,
in, were coming in and learning all these skills and getting out in the field and it becoming more acceptable because you're right. You don't, when you don't, it's hard to feel like you can do something when you don't see yourself reflected in a field. I love the fact that more and more people of different backgrounds and different colors, different whatever it may be, different belief systems, they are coming into these fields and they're starting to become a little bit more of an even playing field because it's about all these different voices, different species with wildlife, different ecosystems, but also different voices that are representing
yeah,
different things, different backgrounds, different experiences, and I'm just it's so heartening to start seeing more people that look like me, that like as a little girl I was like Jane Goodall and Rachel
yeah,
Carson and Diane Fossey and Laurie Marker. There were others, but those are the main ones that you would see. But
yeah,
you that's kind of it. And then you just saw like every TV show at the time was run by there was a guy leading the show. It was always a guy. It was
yeah,
a white guy, which and I was like there's got to be a space like paving a way. It can't just be like three people. So and then seeing more faces of color and different backgrounds and LGBTQ like more people that represent more people getting out there and
completely.
getting involved and having a voice and it was very cute. I had a conversation with one of the guests who she's doing space engineer and aerospace engineering. Again,
Cool.
a COVID moment. Aerospace engineering, and she said one of our favorite puns is that there's always space at the table for everyone. And it's like, yeah,
Fantastic.
it's not that the table's a closed table. It's there's always room and there's a necessity for all these different voices and all these different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds to bring,
Yeah,
which is why I love that a lot of the conservation work has now started including the local communities because I mean, especially in South Africa, you guys know the local communities that back up to the reserves. In the U.S., we have indigenous communities that are, we've actually taken a lot of the tribal lands away from them, and now trying to integrate them more into the process of keeping these wild spaces wilds for everyone, not just some rich people that can come in and enjoy them.
absolutely.
Yeah. Again, it's also the value of something and understanding the value of something. It's everyone needs to be able to experience. It's like you can't. It's so hard to connect to things. I remember like the rhino situation. I remember being down there in outside of Cape Town at the time, and chatting with some people about the rhino situation and the poaching situation, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not great. It's whatever." But and I think because it wasn't literally in their backyard, it's not. I mean, it is, but it's not. Like it wasn't
Yeah,
there in
you're
Cape
not
Town.
standing smelling a rotting carcass with its head
Right.
chopped off. Yeah,
Right. And you're not driving around and seeing them, daily or what. I just, or not
yeah,
daily, as the case may be. But there was this sort of disconnect. And that's within a country where rhino are such an iconic species and part of like the safari culture, which is also so much South African and Africa in general.
yeah,
And there was that sense of disconnect. I'm thinking if people that are in this country that go on like they go to the bush on vacation don't feel this connection, how does the rest of the world feel this connection to stuff and how do you get them to care? And I'm curious to see because I know you guys have like the bird counting, you've got the Flufftail Festival, still my favorite. It's going to be my forever perpetually my favorite
awesome.
name. And also because it's just the cutest little bird. But the like local stuff, getting local people and or not local people, but having it puts the whole idea like go think local, think global, act local. Sorry, again, COVID brain
Yes.
is still. And so stuff that you guys are working on, I know in BirdLife South Africa, like the bird counts and the conservation conversations, which is the
The webinar series, yeah.
the webinar series that you. I watched a whole bunch of them. I just like
Oh, cool.
I binged on the And I was like,
Awesome.
1 for 1. I'm like, I'm gonna watch the next one. I'm like, I'll get to
Nice.
I'm gonna watch another one. But I
Awesome.
love there's specifically one on youth and conservation, and you had 5 panelists, and
Yes.
talking about how people got involved and their experiences. But it's just in terms of the whole local thing, I think people feel this disconnect of things that are far away, thinking it doesn't affect them, but it is a global world. And as this pandemic theoretically, I mean, should have ideally shown people, what happens there happens here. What
Yeah.
happens? It's all connected, and especially with the advent of globalization and travel and trade, we're bringing things all over the world now, and we're more accessible to potential pathogens that maybe we would have never been in contact with had we
Yeah.
not cut down a lot of forests and decided that we were going to go into certain areas and get different kinds of animals for food, whatever it may be. What are some sort of suggestions with regards to local that you think people around the world could theoretically do with regards, particularly with regards to birds, but with regards in general to wildlife that you would suggest so people feel more of a connection to
Yeah,
nature?
absolutely. It's a great question, and I think one of the things that we as BirdLife South Africa have been looking at really, really hard over the last sort of few years in particular, is that it's really important for us to transform who we're working with. So, historically, we've been a very old white kind of it's an old white hobby. Bird watching has always been considered to be this old white hobby, and the reality is that's changing dramatically. I mean, we've got more young birders in South Africa than we've ever had. We have more black birders in South Africa than we've ever had, and we are really trying hard to speak to all demographics within South Africa, not just this old white historic membership base who supported us for many, many eons. And so something that we've been working on really hard is trying to make a lot of our education materials available in the various languages. A lot of your listeners might not know we have 11 official languages in South Africa. So we haven't done all 11 yet, but give us time. We've taken some of the more widely spoken ones, Zulu, Xhosa, Chivenda, and we've taken every year we've got a Bird of the Year campaign that we run. We create a whole lot of awesome education materials, from lesson plans to comic strips to fun infographics. And this year, for the first time, we've been able to translate all of those materials into the various different African languages. And what that does is it allows children who are not necessarily English mother tongue speakers. It is sort of the nationally spoken language in South Africa, English, but everybody has their own home languages. And by translating something as simple as translating this work into a home language for someone, it allows them to access that information and feel that much more connected to it. I think it was Trevor Noah who said that language is the best connecting tool you can ever use. If you can greet someone in their mother tongue, you are immediately connected to them. If you greet them in a language that is not their mother tongue, you are automatically an outsider to them. And so language is such a powerful tool. And so much of what we're doing, we're realizing we have to start speaking people's languages. And obviously, with our diverse range of cultures in South Africa, that presents its own exciting challenge to take on. But we're starting to work with local educators in different communities and training the trainers who will ultimately go out and speak to the children in these communities in their home language and bring that message of birds and conservation into their rural villages in a language that they understand and don't see as this outside Western kind of view. It's very much culturally appropriate. And in working with them, we're learning a lot about this indigenous knowledge system, and the kind of value that these birds have in the different cultures. So the southern ground hornbill, which is our bird of the year this year, has immense cultural value to a number of our different tribes in South Africa. And it's very much associated with bringing rain, foretelling of different events. And so we're starting to unlock all of these different aspects that we can use to try and promote love and need for the species to be present in people's lives. And in doing so, hopefully then bring about better conservation for them. So that's probably one of the key things that we're working on. And yeah, just going out and working with individuals in their various landscapes where they occur, not kind of bringing them out of that system, but working with them intrinsically is so key to being able to make things work.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's incredible. It is how amazing how how much just knowing a simple thing like a greeting in a different language when you go there, it immediately
Completely.
creates this connection, this special kind of connection. That was one of my favorite things about living there, is having to learn so many of the animals in like 7 different languages.
Yes.
Luckily, a few of them carry over. Like Nglovo was still Nglovo, and like 6 of them. So I'm like, all right, I got
Yes.
elephant down. But yeah, the whole simply the Sawubona and Natal for us, because it was so much Zulu, learning a few of the phrases, key phrases, just things like go well at night and have a good, those
Exactly.
kinds of things, where, and it makes such an impact to show someone that you've taken the time to learn their language. And it's so easy
Absolutely.
because English is such, well, it's funny, you'll go to parts of the world and English isn't spoken at all, completely. And it's such a strange thing as an English speaker who's been used to going to countries where people speak English as their first language, or at least it's one of the languages,
That they
to go
can
to a
speak. Yeah.
place where, and years ago I was in Japan, and I always assumed, because of the whole 80s trade thing between the US and Japan, that you'd go there and everything, people would speak English and Japanese. And when, even in Tokyo, I would meet people and no idea, no English whatsoever. And I was like, okay, I can't even pretend, because this is all like all their language is pictures, it's characters. It's like I can't try to
Yeah.
read that. It's not like I could. It's not based on any Latin, like and I could kind of fudge my way through French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, because they're all based on a
Romance
one single
languages.
Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you know one, you can kind of figure out a lot of the other ones. But yeah, that incredible like that one little touch point of connection and showing that you appreciate their. With that Ubuntu, I see you.
Yes.
I I want to know you. I want to know your culture. I want you to know mine. I want to share that with you. And that connection, that the communication, but that connection, that overall connection,
Yep.
it is so important. And I think that for a long time, like you said, it was, not to throw the white people under the bus, like especially the old white men, because they did a great job in terms of keeping things alive. I mean, theoretically, so much of they might have been the people that put it on the brink as well, but bringing back the southern white rhino and, in HIP and in Shishlui. And a lot of that was from a lot of old white men, rich white people that were, again, put them in the position potentially in the beginning, but, at least turned it around a bit. But that it's the idea that it's inclusive, that this takes everyone, and including them. It takes all the voices, it takes all the different cultures, all the different languages to be able to come together and say, this is important. We all need to work together and make sure that this doesn't disappear, because, like you said, there is no planet B. Everyone's like, oh, we're gonna go to Mars. I'm like, we can't get it together here, guys. Let's not go to try to. No,
Yeah.
like we got it here. We got this amazing world here that is everything that we need and then some.
Yep.
And we're like, oh no, we'll just go somewhere else. I'm like, okay,
Yeah. More.
you're missing the mindset. The mindset is we've got it. Why do you need to go somewhere else when we have everything we need here? And there would mean having to recreate everything we have here already. Yep. Over there. Like, what? I don't understand the thinking, guys.
Nope.
Yeah, it's sort of fascinating. But so I know that you have had a day full of meetings, and I don't want to keep you for too long. So I so
That's cool.
appreciate, and I've been chatting away too, because I'm so excited to talk to someone from South Africa, because it's been 2 years and I just miss it. And I was all excited to come.
In your blood.
Yes, it's what is the saying? It's like, once you've been, Africa gets in your blood and it just never lets go. And it's so true. And when I went to South Africa initially, I'd always wanted to go. I'd always been sort of fascinated for whatever reason. I've been fascinated with other countries in Africa, but something about South Africa, and maybe it was because you had these incredible cities juxtaposed with this iconic, incredible wildlife. And it's, interestingly enough, it was a lot of the places that were lesser known that became the places that I ended up falling in love with the most in South Africa. But and I was like, oh, that's really. And I was also infatuated with great white sharks. And I was like, you got great white sharks and lions in the same country. Like, let's do, and penguins. Let's do this.
Yep.
And secretary.
There we go.
That was my favorite South African bird until I met the southern ground hornbill, and then I was like, oh.
Yeah, they're pretty charismatic, both of them.
I love them. I just love watching them.
Yeah.
Like if you see them from far enough away, it's like watching a little human, a little drunk human walking. I love them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was always wanted to get down there and really it's to see it. And I went on a vacation because a friend of mine from university was working in Johannesburg at the time. And I was like, oh, well, perfect. I have a reason to go. Well, I mean, I have a reason anyway, but I have a connection there to sort of be a guide to get me sort of into places. Where should I go? What should I see? Like, I don't want to do the traditional tourist stuff. I would like to get sort of under the skin of. Meanwhile, it was South Africa that got under my skin, and I ended up doing 2 weeks in Natal with Wildlife Act as a priority species volunteer, as a monitor,
Fantastic.
and just falling. And I always joke that my sunrises are usually from the night before. Like I'm not a. I'd love to say that I'm not. I'm so bad at early mornings. I could stay up all night long, but mornings I'm like, oh,
No.
like isn't the sunset similar to the sunrise? But it's just this feeling, this incredible sense of this smells, the sounds, this. I wouldn't like the first when I ended up deciding that I was just going to move down. The first probably 6 months of being there, I don't think I slept at night because I just wanted to hear the hyenas at night. I just wanted to hear the
Yes.
sounds and I would wait up and try to hear that sawing of a leopard and just like I want everything, every little sound. And then as the seasons change and you start to hear the different sounds, like a woodland kingfisher that comes in and you hear that,
Yes.
which by the way, eventually after about a month, I was like, shut up. But,
Yeah.
but it was like getting into the rhythm of something. And again, that I think goes back to the whole communicating to someone in their language. When you can understand where they come from, which has a lot to do obviously with the language and the culture, but also the world around them and be able to speak to them in that and they can speak to you in yours. I feel like it drops those barriers and it makes it so much easier to work together and on a common goal. But yeah, I was hoping to get back to South Africa this past year and that did not happen because we can't leave.
COVID.
Yeah,
Well, I was actually
so
supposed to be in the States right now.
oh,
Caroline's brother was meant to be getting married, but that's been pushed out here, so we can hopefully leave the country and come with. But yeah, it is amazing how we've all had to adapt to this new world.
right.
But yeah, hopefully I'll get over to the States in the not too distant future again.
Well, I'm hoping that you let me know when you're over here. I know it's a big
Yeah,
country. It's
we'll
like
be up
South
in
Africa's a big
Maine,
country.
so it's not
What?
too far from where we'll be up in Maine, so it's not too far from where you are.
I'm going there next week. My partner has
Awesome.
a family cabin on an island off the coast.
Stunning. That's awesome.
So we're actually headed up to Acadia to do some photography.
Beautiful. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit I hate New England weather in general because I hate the cold. I love people like I lived in the Kalahari for a year and I was like, bring it.
Yep.
Heat. I love heat. I love sun and I love heat. But
Yeah.
but at the same time, like I'm very excited. I was actually really excited because I was like, maybe we'll see puffins. And unfortunately, of course, we're gonna miss the puffins for like 2 weeks. But speaking of birds. But yeah, you definitely let me know because it's close. We're northern Massachusetts, so we're
Ah,
literally like
fantastic.
20 minutes from the or half hour from the main border.
Awesome.
So
I'll
but yeah,
definitely let you know if we make it across the pond.
hopefully sooner rather than later, right? Hopefully we start
Yes,
getting this all under control.
absolutely.
So, although I feel like Americans are the worst, we're like the worst offenders. We're so bad. We are. We're so bad. I
Blame it
mean,
on your president.
I'm gonna, yeah. Well, we could blame a lot of things on that.
Yes.
That's a whole other conversation. Another
Yeah,
reason
let's
why
leave that one out of it.
coming back to the States after being gone for 8 years and like being there for the last election and like the next morning, everybody would come up to me and they just had their head down and they're like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I just shell shocked. Like,
Yeah.
what we elected a reality TV. And everyone's like, oh, he's a businessman. I'm like, he's bankrupted like every business he's ever had. And they're like, oh, that happens in business. You just don't know business. I'm like, no, I worked in business for a while, guys. It's not like I don't know, but whatever. Yeah. It's but it's also I think that sort of American exceptionalism, this sort of belief that somehow America's better than the rest of the world. And I'm like, let me tell you something, guys. I've lived in 3 different countries outside of the US. I was lucky enough to live in Australia. I lived in South Africa.
Fantastic.
Well, kind of lived in Costa Rica. I was there for like 3 months. So I sort of feel like it sort of counts, but no, it's like an extended vacation.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I don't know. The rest of the world seems to have a lot of things on us, like healthcare. And I remember I had to get a tooth. So I cracked a tooth while I was in South Africa and cracked it right down. I have no idea what I
Oh,
did, but so I had to, like, the first they thought it was I needed a root canal. So they did a root canal. And I was like, no, it still hurts. And there shouldn't be any roots. So it shouldn't still hurt, right? And they're like, well, maybe because it's a molar, because sometimes some molars have 4 roots versus 3. And I'm like, of course, I got the 4 root molar, right? So they go back in, they're like, all right, we've cleared it all out. I'm like, it still hurts. And they're like, it shouldn't hurt because there should be no. I'm like, well, I don't know. And so they ended up going in and they realized that there was an actual crack through. So they realized they had to replace the
ow.
tooth. Yeah, it was not fun. The most surreal thing in my life was sitting there being awake but totally numbed and hearing them break my tooth as they pull it. I'm like, this is
Not
just
pleasant.
such a strange thing. But that whole process in the States would have cost me like 8 grand, $8,000. And I think in South
Jeez.
Africa, the whole thing cost me maybe 2,000.
Yeah, we're really lucky.
Not to mention that I could actually get insurance for that and like affordable insurance for that. And I
Yeah.
mean, our stuff here is crazy. No, granted, our electronics are significantly cheaper, but
Yes.
I always bought my computer stuff and my camera stuff in the States and then brought it back with me because I
Good
was like,
plan.
um, but yeah, there's so many things that other countries have on us that, we're just, oh no, we're better, we're better, we're better. I'm like, guys, look, we do a lot of things really well, particularly PR of ourselves. And it's an amazing country, and I love this country for so many reasons, but it's not like there's not room for improvement. There certainly is. So, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, we'll get it together at some point and we'll actually be allowed to leave. It's like everyone wanted a wall. I'm like, well, guess what? We made our own
Yeah.
and we can't leave. Not no one else is wanting to come in, and we can't even leave. We worked the wrong way, guys. We did this
Yeah.
wrong. But yeah,
Shame.
so last thoughts quickly.
Mm.
Any suggestions, any advice you have for anyone who's interested in your field particularly, but also in terms of environmental stuff, getting involved. So this is sort of two pronged. Getting involved in your field and the environmental field on the whole, but then also ways to work like locally, and that you think might be able to help. Well, just locally, the ways that people get involved locally too. And
Yeah.
specific, oh, wait, three. I got three for you. Sorry.
Okay.
And also specific skills that you think it would be great for people to cultivate. I think for your field definitely, and for conservation in general, like environmental stuff. But in terms of the broader scope of sort of bringing people together, that's a lot. I should write
Yeah,
this down for you and like write them
that's
on the
okay.
screen.
No, all good. I'll do my best to try and remind me. You can just point me in the right direction if I stray. But yeah, I think in terms of getting involved in conservation at large as a profession, you need to be a very dynamic person. We wear a lot of hats. I wear a fundraising hat, a public speaking hat, a scientist hat, a writer hat. I wear many, many hats every single day. Conservation in the modern world is hugely, hugely dynamic. And I think the biggest barrier probably to anybody wanting to get into conservation is really just finding the in that will allow them to do whatever it is that they want to get involved in, and finding the funding to be able to do that. So it's really important that you develop your ideas well, you have well thought out projects, and really think of every possible aspect that you need to tackle in order to make your project successful, because those curveballs are going to come constantly. Especially when you're working with nature as your laboratory. It's a very unpredictable and dynamic world. So you have to be ready for anything. And yeah, I think in the conservation space, anybody can be a conservationist. It can literally come down to the most simple act at home, thinking about where everything that you buy comes from. Are you buying the imported oranges, or are you buying the oranges that were grown down the road? Using an imported orange, you're going to have all the sort of climate change and carbon emissions that go with getting that product there. You're not supporting your local economies. And I think there's so much power in grassroots initiatives and sourcing local products. So be conscious of where your stuff's coming from. And silly things like eating meat not every day, something like that can really go a long way to reducing global emissions, which helps the climate in such a huge way. I mean, I call myself a flexitarian. I live as a vegetarian at home, but it's not that I don't eat meat. I just tend to eat a lot more vegetarian than meat dishes. But something like that can actually have a really profound effect on the world at large. Just doing something as simple as that, literally eat a vegetarian meal once a week. If every single family did that, can you imagine how much we could reduce our need for all this kind of bulk produced meat and all the unhealthiness and kind of world impact that goes along with that? So there's so many little things you can do. Think about the waste that you're creating. Can you recycle something? Can you reuse something? Can you reduce something? I think everybody always forgets that the first line in that kind of RRR scheme is reduce. And can you buy tomatoes without needing to put them in a plastic bag? Just kind of take them home with you. Really silly little simple tricks like that can go such a long way if everybody starts being conscious of the impact that they're having on the world, and the fact that as individuals and humans, we're not overseeing an ecosystem. We are in the ecosystem. We are another cog in the big machine that is the world. And us turning and doing our thing has ripple effects on everything around us, from the birds in your garden to the birds at large, like across the world. And it's so important that we start shifting our mindset to being part of the solution and part of the system, instead of being this kind of dominant force that has control. The truth is we don't actually have control of the world. Nature will ultimately win. And if she has to wipe us out with some super virus to do it, I'm sure she will. But let's not let that happen. We can actually live in harmony. And I think I've missed one of your last points probably. Is there something I haven't answered?
Oh, no, but I do love the fact that you brought up though, because I have actually had some interesting conversations with people about the whole meat thing. Because I will eat meat, but I usually choose to do more vegetarian. And one of the things that we implemented at the training camp was meatless Mondays, and people would gripe and whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, just one day less makes such a profound difference. And people are like, oh, what are the animals? I'm like, it's not just the farming. I mean, local farming for the most part is a lot more, theoretically, it's a lot more environmentally friendly. You're smaller plots of land, the animals have room to roam, you're keeping the grasslands intact versus clear cutting. The bigger problem is when you're talking about industrial, where you're clear cutting the land to shove a
Put
whole
a
bunch of
factory in.
animals, yeah.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, clear cutting the additional land because you need to feed them. So you're losing habitat 2 times the size, and you're also breeding and fostering illnesses and all kinds of diseases because the animals are in these
Yeah.
close proximity. There's not, it's just so many levels to that. So I love that you
Yeah.
brought that up. Because a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to go vegetarian. It's like, well, I'm not asking, no one's actually asking you to. What we're
Yeah.
saying is to just be conscious, like you said, being conscious of it. At each of your
Yeah.
actions has a repercussion, and it's not just about humans being at the top. We're not. And if anything, in Africa will show you when you're in the bush, you're not
Oh
the top of the
yes.
ecosystem.
No.
Everything out there can potentially waylay you. And
Absolutely.
like what the biggest killer in the continent, aside from us, is a mosquito.
Yeah, something that small can have such a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really true.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. What was it? Now I forgot what the other question was. Oh, so specifically with regards to the bird stuff,
Yes.
please, I'm going to actually get stuff from you, and I will add it to the links part of this.
Fantastic. Yes.
With regards to projects you guys are working on, whatever you can publicize, whatever, any links to any organizations. I know you mentioned the one for mentors if in your field, that's fantastic. Just what was I gonna? There was something else I wanted to ask. I was gonna when you first started saying something, and I was like, oh, that just made me think. And of course, then I'm like, I'm gonna listen to what she has to say, and then I'm gone. Um, oh
I
gosh,
think you
you
were
know,
talking about skills. I didn't really touch on any of the skills people need to
one
do what I do, but a
you did though with regards to
little
having to
bit.
wear different hats, and
True.
that's
Yeah.
you have to be able to. It's so much about communications, being able to write well, being able to reach people, being able
Yeah.
to adapt and change, and realize that you're not just doing one thing. That every day you've got different
Yeah.
things you've got
So
to
many
focus
different
on.
things to do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even remember. I had another question, but I can't remember what it was, and it's all good. You've answered so many ones so fantastically. But yes, please, we'll put a link at the bottom once this is all edited together and like nice and cleaned up.
Yep, no
Uh,
worries.
and I'll put links for BirdLife South Africa, for BirdLife International,
Thanks.
any other things like that. I know you guys do a bird count. Do you guys actually, you know what, do you use, because I don't know, and I could be wrong, and I haven't checked, and I probably should have, but I didn't. Do you have, because I know I'm such a bird nerd with regards to my little phone apps, because my attitude
Yeah.
is like the technology is unfortunately, I mean, it's great and it's bad and great. It's not going anywhere. So I love having all these little apps on my phone to be able to identify. So I know that Cornell has the Merlin bird ID and Audubon in the States. Do you guys have something like that out there? Or is it just, because I know Audubon has stuff around the world. Like they have different
Yeah.
packs you can get.
Yeah, so we don't have anything as sort of advanced as the Merlin app, or I think you guys have some Shazam for birds where you can listen to calls and that sort of thing. We're not there yet in South Africa, but we do have a whole plethora of bird apps that are really, really great. The Roberts Field Guide has been put into a digitized app. The new S05 that's just come out has got an app, Bird Pro, which is another one. We do have tons of different apps, and one of my personal favorites is the BirdLass app, which helps you log sightings of species and record various aspects of the sighting onto a very easy to use cellular app platform. So there's so many app options available in South Africa now, which has really been a game changer in my opinion in terms of getting people out there and onto their phones, and youngsters in particular. When you're cruising around Kruger Park with your parents, you can kind of play game drive cricket and keep track on your phone with all the different things that you're seeing. And yeah, so there are some really good apps out there for South Africa.
And does that get, so that actually bringing, does that go to sort of citizen science? I know the animal demography unit at University of Cape Town does a lot of, so that you can upload that information to the bigger sort of stratosphere of the
Yes, yeah.
conservation
So
world. That's really
there's a
cool.
Southern African Bird Atlas project, which BirdLife South Africa is one of the coordinating bodies on, with the Fitzpatrick Institute at UCT, which is also part of the ADU. So that's one of the ways that we collect data in South Africa. I know some people do eBird here, but the majority of South Africans will contribute towards the Southern African Bird Atlas project. And we've actually got a cause on the BirdLife app for threatened bird species. So every time someone logs a threatened bird species, that point locality data comes straight to BirdLife, and we can kind of monitor our species through that platform, which is really useful for us. Yeah.
That's awesome. I know what I was going to ask you. I don't know, that just made me, I don't know what just made me think of that, but, skill stuff.
Yes.
What, thoughts about volunteering? Because I know there's some volunteering places that are better than others, but do you, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, so there's so many different ways that you can volunteer in South Africa. I know there's a lot of paid volunteer positions for kind of international people wanting to come and experience stuff. And yeah, that's a great platform. I've done a lot of volunteering through my undergrad. Luckily, I didn't have to pay for any of it, but they definitely used their pound of flesh in hosting me. But it was a it was a great way to just kind of cut my teeth and get a feel for hands-on conservation. So one of the places I got to work at was the Delstrom Bird of Prey Center, and I'll never forget scraping black sparrowhawk feces off of a wall with a broom for about 2 hours. That was one of my very entertaining tasks that I had to get my hands dirty on. But in the very same vein, straight after that, I got to fly my first Lana Falcon, which was the closest I'd ever been to a Lana Falcon, and was just such a mind-blowing experience to get so close to these amazing animals. And I mean, I think the key thing with volunteering is really to think about what you want to get from it. Is it something that you just want to experience a little bit and see, is this the kind of field that you want to potentially be involved in? Are you looking to gain some kind of skill? I think look really hard at what you personally want to get out of it. And if it's kind of skills development and that kind of thing, pick your volunteer program so that it lines up with that. And you can come out of it having gained, but also benefiting the organization that you're volunteering for.
Right. Yeah, that's always been one of the arguments with the volunteering is that some people go and they're like, I just want to go on safari. And when we went with Wildlife Act, it was a lot of people were like, well, I'm going to go see elephants. I was like, no, we've the dog, we've got like, it's great. They're an amazing, beautiful herd. And hopefully we'll come back and see them and they'll still sort of be in the same general area. But we need to make sure that the dogs are still alive and functioning and haven't
Exactly.
run off the reserve as they
Yeah.
were wont to do very often up there.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, so it's so true that making sure that your idea and what you want to get out of it is aligned with what the vision is of that particular organization.
Yeah.
Because there are horror stories of, white savior coming to save the world. And, this, well, there used to be, I think it was an Instagram account, and this is terrible, but it was actually hilarious. I think it was called like White Savior Barbie or something like that, or Barbie Savior Barbie, and it was basically someone
Oh,
had created an Instagram account using Barbie, and all these, like, they basically photoshopped her in all her
oh my
little,
goodness.
pith
Yeah.
helmet and khaki clothes, and
Oh,
all these different like situations, like with an orphanage in Uganda, and within a, with whatever animals would run, and just how completely tone deaf she was to what was going on, and the fact that she wasn't providing anything at all. She was
no.
just like, oh, I'm gonna take great selfie with this, then blah blah blah, not realizing the damage that she's actually doing by towards the China, the selfies in general. I always tell people, I'm like, guys, look, just avoid the animal selfies. Just don't. It's not. There's nothing good about it. Don't pet the cubs. Don't, like, just don't do it. Awesome. Well, Melissa, I so appreciate all of your insight and everything, and taking the time to chat, and uh, especially after a long day of meetings.
All
So,
good. No,
yeah,
thanks, Jen, and thank you for the opportunity to showcase BirdLife South Africa and the work that we do. And yeah, thanks for having your podcast and showcasing all these amazing women doing their thing.
I mean, you guys are doing this. I'm not doing, I'm just giving, I'm like, I just talk too much. I need to start shutting up and letting you guys do more talking. Just like I said, like, I'm so excited to have another to be around a South African again, even though you're through a
For
screen. I'm like,
sure.
no. But, but you guys are doing phenomenal work, and it needs to get out there to more people. And if I can be a way to get it out, it's like, if it's just one extra boost that you guys can get, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
So,
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate that.
and like I said, I will add all the links. I'll send you an email after, and we can add a bunch of links in, and get people
Perfect.
involved and get them out there loving the birds, because they should,
Yes,
because they're amazing.
absolutely.
Do you have a favorite
Oh
bird?
yeah, the secretary bird, hands down. I don't know if you
Is
can see him in my, oh, it's on that side.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, the no secretary birds. I actually gave a webinar on them last night, but hands down, my absolute favorites. They're just so quirky and amazing to watch them stride across the grassland. So yeah, I've been spellbound by them ever since I was little, and yeah, very very privileged to be able to work on them now.
Yeah, this is the thing that I love about birds, like secretary birds in general, because people are like, oh, what are you, they're not whatever. I'm like, they're badasses, man. They will smash a
Stomp on
snake.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they don't screw around. They're really
yeah,
cool. Anyway, okay, so like I said, we'll put the links in. Yeah,
brilliant.
and thank you so much. And I'm gonna actually go hang out with the birds by the feeder now and see what's going
Enjoy.
on. Yeah,
Cool.
I'll if I get any cool pictures, I'll make sure to send them to you.
Yeah, please do. It'll be good to have a look at some North American birds again. It's been a while.
Well, like I said, most of mine are getting scared away by the blue jays, so you might get a lot of blue jay. But
That's
there
all
are some
right.
really, like the house finch, which I didn't even know existed. Like, it's so embarrassing that I spent 8 years in South Africa and can name a whole ton of birds down there now, and like identify the calls and everything. But coming back to the States, I'm like, I know seagull, pigeon, chickadee. I love chickadees. Like, those are
Yep.
cardinal and blue jay. That's kind of
Yeah.
it. And the rest of them, I'm like, and I know there's a lot of different pigeons and there's a lot of different seagulls, but for all, like right now, mine, there's just all one seagull. So I had to learn, and like there's so many really cool birds here too, and just we have a lot of
Absolutely.
LBJs though, a lot of little brown jobs.
Yeah, and you've got all your fall migrant warblers on their way to you soon, which is another whole kettle of fish when it comes
Yeah.
to ID.
Yeah, I might need to have to get. I might need to have a conversation with the Blue Jays and be like, all right, guys, you need to just. I'll set a little free feeder away aside for you, so that the
Yep.
rest of the birds can come through and actually
Yes,
eat, so I can see that they can. Anyway, all right,
for
cool. Well,
sure.
enjoy your day. Have a
Thanks,
fantastic
Jen. Yeah,
Wednesday, and we'll be in
awesome.
touch.
Definitely. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank
Cheers.
you. And conservation conversations. It's through BirdLife South Africa's website. Yes, you can get through it.
Yes.
It's on
Yeah.
YouTube, but you can
Yeah.
get through
Also
it through
through
your
our
website.
website. Yeah.
Okay.
So on the sort of heading banner that flashes across the top of our homepage, if you just kind of move it along, you'll see the conservation conversations one on there. You can just click it and it'll take you through to the page.
Awesome. All right, everybody,
Epic.
you guys should go check it out. They're really interesting. They're honestly very, and I know that I'm a bit of a bird nerd, so maybe I'm a little biased, but still, no, they are truly. If you got someone like me interested, they're awesome. Dr. Melissa Howes-Whitecross, I appreciate your work and the stuff that you guys are doing with BirdLife South Africa and in general. You're awesome. Thank
Thanks,
you
Jen.
again, and we will talk.
All the
We'll
best.
talk soon.
Absolutely. Keep well.
You too.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope we may have made some bird converts of you. If you want to learn more about some of the cool projects and incredible wildlife Melissa mentioned, check out BirdLife South Africa at birdlife.org.za. BirdLife also has international chapters, so you can find them all over the world. The podcast she mentioned, Conservation Conversations, is led by BirdLife South Africa, so you'll find it on their website. Also, check out the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is a yearly event held every February. Melissa can be found on Instagram at MelissaW27 and Twitter at MWhitecross27. If you want to find out more about our podcast at Nature Knows, head on over to lateshiftmedia.com. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to Nature Knows, Conversations with Wild Warriors and Changemakers. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.